Yeah, thank you. I'm aware that my colleague Anna Sikula has been also presenting our work, particularly when it comes to the right to environmental protection and the fundamental rights-based, human rights-based approach to this work from our side as the Fundamental Rights Agency. And what I will focus on today is really in relation to child participation based on diverse trends of work that we do in that regard. We have a long history of conducting research with and for children, consulting with children in diverse areas, particularly when it comes to their access to justice. And I have also this survey data from different groups, in particular vulnerable situation, also young adults and children. And I will point at a few aspects to also then see what this really concretely means for child participation, particularly also in the context of environmental policies. So when you look into children's right to environmental protection, I first want to start kind of with the impact. And I mean, many points I know that you're absolutely aware of in this setting and community, but I try to kind of make the linkages between these different aspects, to particularly the question of child participation and children's right to be heard and to be protected. So, of course, we have the natural consequences, we have the economic impacts, we have the territorial risks, and we have published this paper on towards a fundamental rights compliant European Green Deal, and I'm referring to also as findings from that paper specifically. And I wanted to point at particularly at the social risks. The risks related to housing, to health, to living conditions that we do see in diverse studies by other actors and by ourselves are affecting disproportionately certain groups, and children are among them. Also, we have to be aware that those risks intersect. So, for example, when we think of children with disabilities, with health conditions, and other. Everything all right? Because I hear sound, but all good. You can hear me? Good, very good. So I want to point at a few data from our own reports. I think we are aware of the European indicators that poverty is affecting children belonging to certain groups of the population, such as Roma children, children with immigrant background, children of single parent or large families, and children whose parents have a low education attainment level. Families living at risk of poverty are, for example, also particularly vulnerable to energy poverty. I mean, when we look into our data, particularly on the situation of Roma children with regard to living conditions, we do see, and here I cite data from 2021. We have again other new data from 2020, last year published in different member states, but the patterns are repeating. So I point at this data from that survey, and children up to the age of 17. To 85% at risk of poverty. 48% among them live in households in severe material deprivation. 55% of children aged till 15 live in situations situations of deprived housing, and at the same time, 21% of the children live in a local area with environmental problems. So with a group of Roma, we can really see how much all these aspects intersect and what high risk they are. And we do see this exacerbation of risks and inequalities due to already vulnerable circumstances, such as difficult living conditions, health issues, mental health issues, unequal access to support due to also, for example, infrastructure and segregated living conditions. And here we want to point at the European Green Deal on a just transition, which aims at that no person is left behind. There's ample evidence that children are left behind. So also we do see this as a kind of not fulfillment of citizens in the European Union to environmental protection, as said in Article 37 of the Fundamental Rights Charter, that there needs to be a high level of environmental protection, and the improvement of the quality of the environment must be integrated into the policies of the Union and ensured in accordance with the principle of sustainable development. So we see with the European Green Deal that is this aim, but we also from our side really point and identify kind of how a human rights-based approach needs to be applied to EU policies, such as on environment. And three principles I want to point at here particularly, that's the attention to people in situations of vulnerability, the impact of climate change and environmental degradation on people in vulnerable situations, such as those living in poverty or facing discrimination, and the goal to leave no one behind. And as seen from data by UNICEF, other actors from your project, and also FRA data, the children are at a particularly highly impacted and a particular risk. Also, that goes for the question of non-discrimination, also considering discrimination by age. Children have have difficulties often to access justice proceedings and also democratic procedures and be part of participatory bodies, and for example, in relation to environmental policies and developments. And the other principle is participations. Citizens and local communities must be empowered to participate actively, as stated in the Aarhus Convention. And we are all aware of those points, but I do think that there's often not the absolute awareness that for children, it's even more difficult, that they are not discriminated, that they can participate. So we do see the need for child participation. Also here, I want to point at the Convention, Children's Rights Convention by the UN, also the Fundamental Rights Charter, the right of the child to be heard. State parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child. The views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age maturity of the child. I'm reading this out loud just to remind ourselves that they have the right to express their views freely in all matters affecting the child. And I do think we will all agree that the risks, the impact of climate change and the consequences of this are affecting children largely. So do they really kind of have their right to be heard fulfilled? I do also want to point at the key principles of child participation, as also described explicitly in the general comment number 12. So these processes of to be heard and participate need to be transparent and informative, voluntary, respectful, relevant, child-friendly, inclusive, supported by training, safe and sensitive to risk, and to be accountable. And yeah, so these principles are actually, when we look into those in detail, to check whether we fulfill them, I think they're often more difficult than we think first, or when we also observe certain participatory practices that they may not be really complied with. I also want to point out that Article 24, here also it says clear, children may express their views freely. Such views shall be taken into consideration of matters and which concern them. And child's best interest must be of primary consideration. And we always, when we talk about child rights, it's always about participation and protection. So it's, in this case, also to be protected from the severe consequences of difficult living conditions, particularly affected also through climate change. But also the participation to really have a say and have also an influence on what is happening, and for example, also through demonstrations, which is, I think, also a big topic when we talk about access to justice of children in this context. So if we talk about participation, I want to point at some latest research we did, systematic mapping in all member states on integrated child protection systems. It's very comprehensive. It's about legislation, policies, programs on different areas. It also looks into kind of how member states try to ensure children's participation, not only in judicial proceedings, but also in democratic processes. So here are the links to this work, and I will just point at this particular aspect that we have looked into. The question of the direct and meaningful child participation, also in the context that children's right to be heard is fulfilled. What we do see in this analysis, comparative analysis, is that there is an awareness at European and national level that children's rights have to be promoted, that children should be aware of their rights, that the general population should be aware of children's rights, but then the concrete actions and measures are often very ad hoc and short term. So not, for example, as systematically embedded in education curricula, school curricula. Most European Union countries have some form of child participation mechanisms, often at very different levels, sometimes local, some national. And also there we see, and that's why also this research is titled Integrated Child Protection Systems in line with the Commission's recommendation. We do see that this integration is also here often lacking. So for example, some member states have these mechanisms on a local level, the city councils, but then the link to kind of the national policies and developments is not really implemented in a way that it's working, and also the other way around. I want to flag the EU Children's Participation Platform by the Commission, and also the children. This platform have always flagged the importance to be really part of these policy processes and discussions on environmental policies. And we have the child barometer, we have youth councils, but not all of them also are aligned with the EU strategy on the rights of the child, which also very clearly puts child participation at first. Also, the Council of Europe has kind of the child participation assessment tool, which can be kind of used to check how much a member state complies. And of course, UNICEF has very valuable guidance on participation. What we do say in our conclusions is that child rights impact assessments are needed to ensure children's right to be heard in decision making and evaluation, and also that children have access to complaints mechanisms. There we come really into this topic of also access to justice. Are children aware? How can they be supported? How is their access to legal representation, to free legal aid, and all this whole package that makes it much more difficult for children to have access to also climate justice. What we do see by the work of different actors and ourselves, and has also been, for example, focus been of the European Network on Child-Friendly Justice, is how does the child participation in environmental policies currently looks like. So that's a bit of a summary of different strands of work and discussions. So we do see the unequal participation opportunities, that children from marginalized communities, especially in low-income regions, often lack the resources and access to participate in climate movements. And for example, also the digital divide limits access to online advocacy tools for children in poorer regions, again, restricting their voice in the climate conversation. The question we also see is how sustainable can youth-led movements be, as many of these movements lack institutional support and long-term sustainability. We need more adequate funding, we need mentorship, structural backups. So otherwise these movements face strong risks of burnout or loss of momentum. Then we have the challenge to integrate children's perspectives into formal policy frameworks. Governments and institutions have been quite slow to incorporate child-specific considerations in climate policies. And we hear this really repeatedly from children that kind of they participate, they voice their opinion, but then the follow-up is lacking. They are not informed also about the follow-up, but they don't see that this was really also incorporated. We also do see that there should be more comprehensive curricula to equip young people with the knowledge and skills to advocate for the rights in the face of climate change. So to really have some training and climate education. So, I raised the issues in that context, and I want to close with important points of how to ensure meaningful participation. And many contexts, many actors follow now this Lundy model, like it's also for the European Commission, for the European Child Participation Platform, a model that has become kind of a practice to refer to. And it is I do think that these principles from the general comment are also extremely helpful to really, because there are more principles to really check, have we fulfilled those principles. In this model, of course, it is very nice because you have 4 aspects that are very concretely to be identified and analyzed. The voice of children, the space for children, the influence children have, and the audience. And I want to give you examples of how also we in our work try to ensure safe and meaningful participation along those 4 important areas. So when we talk about space, children must be given safe, inclusive opportunities to form and express their views. So what we always try, that they reach out to a diverse group of children, and this is, one has to say, in certain groups of children then are more difficult to reach out than other groups, that we always have trained professionals who listen to children's experience in a child-friendly setting, considering the children's needs, their sensitivities, and that also appropriate procedural safeguards in place, coming to privacy questions, for example, questions of trust. But also when we talk about access to justice, of course, legal support. So when we talk about the voice, children must be facilitated to express their view. So any form of participation, communication, interaction with children has to be in a supportive, encouraging way. Also, activities with children or some research need some joint preparation and consultation with children on how to best do this. Now we come to this question of impact. The view must be listened to. So we need to ensure that the views are listened to by the professionals in contact with the child, by the institutions, by the wider public through, for example, reporting and dissemination of results on a national and European level. Then also there needs to be some impact. The view must be acted upon as appropriate. So, for example, from our side, when we conduct research with children or consult with children, we really always see that this input is also provided, for example, for the implementation reports by the European Commission and different areas related to children's rights, that we also report back to children, that kind of also that they kind of learn what has been happening with it, or that they also can take for example, certain findings, conclusions, developments, and also to work with those and continue also their own work, for example, as advocates. That there are capacity building activities for everyone involved, professionals, children, the community, and also joint workshops. That's we think it's very important, of the follow-up, for example, of consultation, the input, piece of research. So to conclude, overall, we consider this really important to encourage young persons' participation in decision-making procedures and really raise the awareness of this importance in the wider community and public, with authorities, with professionals, with also via media and at schools. That I think also what we still have to continue to do to raise the awareness for the unique perspectives and issues of children and young adults. I'm not sure how much your experience has been in this regard, but we do really see often some hesitation, and we're often very surprised that, because we think that people don't seem to be aware, I mean, how important this perspective is and also how unique. So yeah. Then also, we do think it's very important to have a targeted research data collection with and for young persons and children, but also young adults. There also, when it comes to the impact of climate change on children, young adults, it's also already a challenge, but also when we look into kind of research on the impact of child participation, the data becomes even more scarce. and also often not so much disaggregated, which is always a problem. We do also need to highlight issues of particular concern for younger generations, such as mental health issues or risks, the need for participation in democratic processes. So I also want to remind of the ongoing discussions on the right to vote, that, yeah, protection against violence online and offline, and of course, the impact of climate change. We need to keep in mind to use participatory methods and communication to adapt to specific needs of different young age groups. And of course, all of this should be based kind of through children. What are good methods, and how does it work for them to have participate in a safe, meaningful way? Yeah, with the data collection, that really have to think also this aggregation within the group of young persons. And also here we really, I think as far it would be good if we manage to move forward there. It's really also a challenge for us, also particularly quantitative data. And we have to see that children and young adults face very specific challenges and risks, and that need to be addressed through policies, research, and non-discrimination standards, as children have unique rights. Thank you very much. Also, I shared already my presentation. Here's also the links to the key reports I've been referring to. And yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to listening to the other co-speakers and also about the outcome of the Enrich project.